Hello, everybody. How are you doing? Thanks for joining us at Intro to Startup and AMA with Ofori, who is joining us from Houston. But before we get started onto the whole programming, I wanted to welcome our CEO of Capital Factory, Josh Baer, to tell you a little bit about more what we do.
Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas. Thousands of entrepreneurs, programmers, and designers gather day and night, in person and online, for meetups, classes, and co-working. And with our team spread across the state in Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, we meet all the best entrepreneurs in Texas and introduce them to the people that they need to meet most: investors, customers, and talent to grow their team. We watch all of this happen so that we have this unique insight into the market and use that to invest in all the best companies through our Texas Fund. And we've been the most active early stage investor in Texas since 2010.
Thanks, Josh, for that intro. So yeah, like he mentioned, we call ourselves the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas. That is why we have an office in Dallas, in Houston, and in Austin. And we provide a bunch of resources for all of our founders to just get better connected to the ecosystem that's going to help them thrive. And so we host this AMA monthly. And so thanks for joining us. Now I'm going to welcome our co-host for the day, Ofori. Are you there?
Here I am. Look at that. Materialized. Hola, Eliana. How are you?
Good. I'm good. So guys, I just met Ofori about 2 minutes ago. He let me know that he's married to a Mexican, which I am also. So we got diversity happening here. So glad that you could join us today. How are you doing? How's everything?
I am doing very well, thank you. It's a good day to be an entrepreneur. How are you doing?
Awesome. Good. We're good. Well, I want you to introduce yourself because who better to tell your story than you yourself?
It's boring. All right, look, I don't like to spend a lot of time talking about me. I'm sure there are better things that we could do at the time, like, have a knitting class or something like that. But so I am a middle-aged Jedi, still trying to find his way in the world. I've been doing
blue or red.
Oh, well, I guess the background will tell you. I've done a lot of different things. I've been in doing my own business and entrepreneurship for most of my career. In fact, I've never worked for a big corporation. And here in Texas, my story in Texas is I came here to Texas in 2007 just because they talk funny here. I wanted to be at a place where people say, it's raining harder than a cow pissing on flat rock. I wanted to be at a place where people said that with confidence. And so I said, let's go there. We did.
Hey, you've mastered it and you're not from Texas.
But I got here as fast as I could. I have been indoctrinated. And so then 2009 came to Houston. I was recruited by a friend and former client to help start a company. It was a joint venture startup that bought, built, and operated airports around the world. And so the company was based here, but I was on planes all the time. And so my adventures have led me all around the world. And after getting done with the airport business, I then opened up a boutique advisory firm, which I still currently have, called 360 Approach. Basically, it's a generalist, industry agnostic practice where I focus on strategy and planning, organization and culture, operations execution, design experience. However, most of that activity has now been put aside for me to focus on terraforming the Houston ecosystem and soon to launch a new hardtech venture studio, hopefully before the end of the year.
Awesome. How exciting. So, I want to talk about Houston. I grew up in Houston. I went to high school there and, I never really saw much of like a startup or a business. Well, obviously business, yes, but like startups and accelerators and all of that. So walk me through the history. What have you seen? Tell me your experience on that and what you're seeing in the next 10 years.
Yeah, Houston has, there have been a lot of startups and startup activity here for a while. The thing is that Houston's a very, very, very big city. It's also a very big business ecosystem, of which what you might consider your classic tech startup or tech-enabled startup, whatever you want to call it, sort of on that in that Silicon Valley model, didn't really exist here for a while. And then probably maybe 6 years ago or so, I think is when you started to see more of those come in. Station Houston got set up just a little over 5 years ago. You have the Houston Technology Center. And so there was more activity starting to come into play. The Rice Alliance had been doing that with their business competition for quite some time.
Right.
But then things started to really sort of solidify and foment about 3.5 years ago is when I would say the current epoch got going. And I mark it with the so-called Amazon snub when Houston didn't make it onto the short list for Amazon's HQ2.
Right.
And that seemed to be a wake-up call here. And some people felt some kind of way about that. And next thing you know, there was a lot of political will and a lot of dollars and a lot of effort put into, hey, we need to develop a 21st century economic base here. And
Right.
we went from maybe 5 or 6 non-university SDOs to now I think the count's over 42 if you add them up all together. So the ecosystem is still small comparatively, but it's definitely emerging, definitely gaining traction, and is definitely quite rich and robust.
That's interesting that you bring that point of Amazon HQ, just because. So I live in San Antonio currently. And so it seems like also, the Tesla factory was a wake up call also. And then Space Command choosing, I think they chose Tulsa over like San Antonio, which is like Military City, USA. So it seems to be the usual wake up call for cities. Should be something else. But that's pretty interesting that you say that. And so walk me then through your journey as now an entrepreneur, being also a consultant, becoming a mentor, and being a big part of what is now being the builder of the ecosystem in Houston.
Yeah, when I, and originally when stuff was starting to pop off, this whole HQ2 thing was going on, I really didn't have anything to do with what we would consider right now to be this tech innovation and entrepreneurship community that was coming together. HX had just gotten born, and they started doing a road show, or these what were they calling it? Kind of like a road show, but here in town.
Yeah.
And I remember going to one of them and stopping a guy named John Nordby and saying, "Hey, listen, I just have 2 questions for you. What's the vision and who's in charge?" And he said, this is going to take a little bit longer to answer than just the few moments I have. And we went to lunch, and I told him, "Listen, I'm an old school entrepreneur. So when I was coming up, we didn't have SDOs. We only had the SBA. And I came up in the era where profits were still fashionable. So I don't know about all this stuff right now. I think that maybe the world has just moved on." He said, no. We need guys like you. We need more of these, actual business minded, not just startup minded, VC minded entrepreneurs. And I said, all right, well, cool. And so I started poking around, and I decided, I need to really get more involved and do my homework. And so Capital Factory was actually the first SDO that I started mentoring for. And it started with a ill-fated bus trip on a Capital Factory tour where we all were converging on Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And we were leaving. So there were buses leaving from Austin, Houston, and Dallas to converge on Fort Worth.
Right.
Well, I was invited to come along on the Capital Factory bus coming from Houston. And we left from the Cannon early in the morning, and 20 minutes in, this was in August. So this was 2 years, end of July. So almost exactly 2 years ago. At the 20-minute mark or so, we lost AC, and it got interesting. And so we have a bus packed with people. It's hot. The bus driver, that was her very first time driving that bus ever. She didn't know where the controls were. We had to pull over several times. It wound up taking us almost 5 hours to get there. And the 2 Capital Factory reps who had only been on the job for 5 weeks at that point, Brittany Barreto and I'm sorry, his name just blanked on me, but it was really interesting. So they called me up and they say, "Hey, Wogbe, say something." And so I said, "All right." So I got to the front of the bus and I said, "Okay, listen, I want to Kendrick Aldrich, thank you."
There
And
you
I
go.
said, "Listen, I want to thank Brittany and Kendrick for this great object lesson in entrepreneurship." Because if you can't take the heat, get off of the bus. And the bus erupted. And from there, we had a great time. And I gave everybody some really simple guidance. I said, listen, this is what it's about. You got to adapt, improvise, overcome. We're going to make it. And when we get to Fort Worth, you're not going to say a word about this. You're going to be perfectly cool, calm, and collected. You're going to get off and you're going to do what you came here to do. You're going to pitch. You're going to talk to investors. You're going to talk to mentors. And you're just going to be there like nothing else happened. And if you do that, I promise you that we will have earned street cred and it'll go fine. And that's exactly what happened. The CapFact team was great. They radioed ahead to Dallas and told them, hey, listen, send ahead a box of soap and t-shirts so that people can go and freshen up in the bath. That's what they did. And people had to go fresh up in the bathroom, but it was a great time. Not only was it a bonding experience, but when we were there, everybody was like, oh, you were on that bus. And it was one of those things that creates these memorable moments. But it's something that, again, was a great object lesson because these are the sort of things that you just have to, you got to roll with it. You got to overcome those challenges. And everybody on that bus, if anybody is listening to this now, a veteran from the 2019 hot bus, and we were talking about having t-shirts made up because that's a Capital Factory thing. But for those of you out there, you know, hey, you know, the struggle is real. Solidarity to the folks from the hot bus.
That's hilarious, Whoopi. I was going to say, let's bring those road shows back. And then you started with the story. And I was like, Sam, did you choose the right speaker? Did you choose the right speaker? That's awesome, Whoopi. What a story. I mean, if it's such a signature event, nobody at Capital Factory has ever told me about it. But thank you for sharing.
Hey.
That's awesome. And so tell me then, you were telling us that you started your mentoring program with Capital Factory. Mm-hmm. Now tell me what it is that you see. You know, we just reopened at the Ion a couple of months ago. How are you seeing it, you know, move forward? Obviously, we're still in COVID and everything. Tell me about the future of where you see Houston going.
Yeah, so in terms of what's happening here in Houston, so unfortunately, CapFac has had a couple of false starts when it comes to getting the Houston side going. Right. Most of it not, you know, circumstantial. Yeah. So we had there was a lot of thought and emphasis being put on 2020 really being the year for Houston and Capital Factory, and unfortunately, COVID kind of threw everything off. Yeah. But now I think there's this renewed interest and opportunity. There's definitely a lot to fold into here. Operations at the Ion haven't started yet, so Ion is still ramping up very slowly. But I see that there's a lot of things happening here, and there's a lot to do. One of the things that I've said about what's going on in Houston is that I believe that we are on the path to achieving escape velocity. So I think we've crossed this line of no return where we're going to get there. The challenging thing about Houston is a very, very well-established city. And so therefore it has a lot of cultural inertia. That means it's going to take a lot to change things. And a lot has been happening, but still our ecosystem is still relatively small, especially even compared to the larger business ecosystem, but that's changing. And as we are including more people into the conversations, we're being more deliberate about reaching out to people outside of the supposed bubbles. And especially here in Houston, we also have this thing where there tend to be these, what I call gravity wells. So, if you're in oil and gas, you're in oil and gas and you're an oil and gas person, or you're in healthcare and you're a healthcare person. And sometimes we have difficulty seeing that the skill sets that can be developed in those areas can be interchangeable and can serve multiple purposes in multiple domains and multiple industry verticals. And that again takes this overcoming this cultural inertia. And so I see a lot of work still needing to be done. But I do think that for Houston, this is the thing that I've been saying a lot. I think that the H in Houston stands for hard. And I have become a very, very strong proponent that the differentiating factor for Houston is that Houston is the place where you come to solve hard problems. We've got some fantastic physical sciences engineers who have been solving very hard problems for a long time. And many of them have been in specific verticals like oil and gas, what have you, and have been locked into a particular type of thinking. But I've been trying to preach the gospel and say, let's open that up, because there are so many hard problems to solve. And this is really the decade for it. And I think, sort of to make lemons out of lemonade, starting out with a pandemic, wherein, SaaS programs and productivity programs, whether it be Zoom or StreamYard, all these different things that have popped up that have made it easier for us to communicate, be entertained, etc. That's all great. But those are not the things that actually are keeping us alive. It's a company like Moderna that was in a startup studio 12 years ago that are producing the things that are moving the needle in terms of our physical lives. And so I really see now, you see so much more activity happening in terms of robotics and mobility and biotech, healthcare. These are deep tech. These are really the things where I think Houston has a particular DNA proclivity that drives us towards solving these hard problems. And I believe that the next decade is really going to be where you see Houston become not just a national center, not just a Texas center, not just a national center, but a global center of hard tech innovation.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, very well said. So I want to encourage the audience, if you are online, that, this is Intro to Startup Scene and AMA. So feel free to drop your questions on the little chat. We'll be addressing them throughout the programming, just because I feel like that's more fun than towards the end. So we'll do that. We'll see them drop by. So Wogbe, also, by the way, audience, you can ask Wogbe about his personal experience. Also, if you're a founder, how do you, overcome certain challenges maybe you're going through yourself? So feel free to drop them in the chat. So Wogbe, tell me, but since I'm already touching on the subject, tell me, what is the one thing that clicked in your head and you said, I'm the type of entrepreneur that wants to do this? And you've mentioned you've never worked in corporate America. And so what is that drive, that motivation? What is maybe the one thing that you would tell somebody that it's like on the edge of taking that leap forward?
I think that the first thing that somebody who's on the edge of taking that leap forward has to understand is that, contrary to popular belief, entrepreneurship is not really a vocation. It's a lifestyle. And it's something, and I define it very, very simply. Okay? Wogbe's definition of entrepreneurship is where one is more opportunity-centric than risk-averse. And it doesn't mean you're risk addicted. It doesn't mean you go looking to do risky things, but it means you see opportunity first. And I think in this period of time that we've been going through over the past couple of years, there's a phrase to describe it. It's an acronym called VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, although Wogbe's version devolves from complexity to complication to chaos, and ambiguity. And it's really caused, I think, not only has it caused so much disruption, socially, politically, economically, but it's also created such opportunity. And one of the great things that you're seeing now is a move to entrepreneurship by people who never would have considered it before, because the risk calculus is changing. When a lot of people lost their jobs. So here in Houston, we had a lot of people lose their jobs in the early part of the pandemic due to the double black swan event in the oil and gas industry. And so I think it was May or something like that, March or May, one of the two, we had 400,000 people lose their jobs in a period of a month. I mean, it was terrible. And that, I think, opened up this new possibility where you're recalculating career risk and saying, we've been through 3 major downturns in oil and gas in 5 years. Either I've experienced losing my job or I might lose my job. Maybe this might be the time for me to take that shift and say, maybe I'm going to start my own thing. And there are a lot of people who have been in industry for a while. And this is another interesting thing about Houston, that we have a much higher percentage of people with domain expertise and a lot of industry experience, wherein we're talking about 10 years or more, who then go to starting a new venture, whether it be joining a startup or starting something on their own. I want to be careful about quoting the statistics because they can be off. But here, I believe that the average or the median, age of startup entrepreneurs is actually between 42 and 48,
Okay.
which is much higher than it is in the other, the three major centers of entrepreneurship, whether it be the Valley or Boston or New York, and I think it's probably higher than Boston too. So, so I would say if you're on that fence, the other great thing is that there are so many programs and there's so much information now for you to dig in to find out more about what it's about and get so much further ahead with zero cost and practically zero risk other than your time than when I got started in business. I mean, now I think, you can YouTube videos, free webinars like this, listening to some, bozo like me run his mouth and say, okay, I think I might be able to do that. I think I can relate to that. And then you start to find I'm not the only one out there. There are other people who have trodden this path and gone before me. A lot have failed, that's true, but also some have been successful. And so I think you have much more, many more archetypes to go and draw from rather than just the mega successes, the legends, the Steve Jobses and the Sam Waltons and those people. But, you have a lot more people who are kind of closer to where you stand, and you could say, hey, I can relate to that. That person's only a few years ahead of me on this journey. Let me go and try that. And the last thing I would say is that in a lot of these established communities and even the up and coming ones, particularly the up and coming ones, and I think that this is particularly true in the middle of the country, there's a very strong how can I help you culture. That's one of the things that I'm very proud of here in Houston, a very strong how can I help you culture. So you reach out to people and they'll say, yeah, sure, how can I help? And I'll tell you a little bit about what I was doing, or maybe I'll help you make a connection. So lots of opportunity.
Awesome, Wogbe. So following up on a lot of things that you touched on. So you talk about resources, and accelerators are kind of like a new concept here in Texas, and because more are popping up throughout the state. Obviously, Capital Factory. I mean, we switched our business model a little bit from being an accelerator to being more of a strategic partner and super advisors to our companies, but to a founder that maybe has gotten stuck after a year of working into their venture or their startup. What is something, you can talk about it as broadly as you want or as specific to address a couple in Houston. Tell me a little bit of programs that you would say, go through this or go through that, or start looking on this side or start reaching out on this side. So how would you advise somebody to go about it?
Sure. So here in Houston, we have some resources that are available. So we have, I mentioned Houston Exponential, and Houston Exponential has this thing, HTX Tech List, where you can go and look up where the different accelerators are and different things that are happening. It gives descriptions of them. We have a lot of programs, a lot of activity, and a lot of things that are happening for free. And so I would advise people to go and drop in on some of these things, get on the mailing lists and see, okay, what's going on over here and what's going on over there, that community or this community. One of the differences about Houston versus, say, some of the other hubs in Texas, like, for example, Austin is very, and I would say this the same thing in Dallas and in San Antonio. They have geographically centric hubs. So you have geographic density that's created around a small area. Houston, by its own nature of urban sprawl, it doesn't have a geographic center hub. Right. So really, I use Lawson Gals, who's the founder of the Canon. I use his term, a constellation of hubs is really what Houston's play is. So we have a lot of different hubs around the city that when connected together create a greater than the sum of its parts effect. And so we have a lot of opportunities and a lot of ways to plug in. a lot of there's Mark Nathan has a newsletter, Texas Startup
Square.
Newsletter, I think it's called.
Yes.
And so if you just look that up, you'll be able to find the site and sign up to it. And he does a great job of weekly, he's been doing it for years now,
Yeah.
faithfully weekly on Sundays, putting out, hey, this is what's happening in these different areas. I have to admit, it was light on Houston, even though he was here, and then we lost him to Austin. But he's started to put more of those things that are happening here in Houston as well. If you go to the websites of any of the major hubs like the Ion, the Canon, you'll get a lot of the programming that's happening here. And depending upon industry too, we do have some specific things for specific industries. If you're in healthcare, what's going on at TMC Innovation Institute definitely will be of interest to you. So
Awesome.
Lots of opportunity.
Awesome, Wogbes. So don't pay attention to me right now. My Mac is about to die, guys. I have to go charge it, so disregard me. But one last question, well, not last question, but just while you bear with me. So you also talk about, having these constellations in the different places. Tell me how it is that you guys are connecting instead of having that central hub, because that's also a little bit of San Antonio. We have the north side, we have the downtown, we have Port San Antonio. We also have Southwest Research Institute on another side. And not that we're not doing a great job, but tell me how Houston is doing it. Guys, don't pay attention to me. I'm going to be moving around. I have to charge my laptop.
Don't pay attention to me. That's very Wizard of Oz. Don't look back here. Don't look at the lady behind the curtain who's now moving around and giving us a tour. Is that your house?
That is my house.
No. I think this is interesting.
Guys, this was not supposed to be a tour. Wogbes, answer my question.
Look at that chandelier. That's nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There you go. I got it handled. We're plugged in.
Okay, good. No, I enjoyed that little bit of CapFact TV, and
there you go.
You got to do the big reveal there. Now you're there in front of the chandelier. That's a really good question. It's been a challenge. It continues to be a challenge. And it's one of the things that I just actually finished up a tour on I call it an anti-committee because I don't do committees.
Okay.
Committees are dysfunctional teams, so I don't do committees. But yeah. I was on what I called an anti-committee for Houston Exponential that we called the Density, Collisions, and Connections Committee, or DC squared. And that was really our prime focus, was two things. Was one, how do we create that virtual infrastructure that connects these various hubs of activity to get folks out of their respective gravity wells to again create that greater than the sum of its parts effect. And then outreach. How do we reach out not only outside of the city, but also outside of our bubbles? And I think that that's something that we are aware of here in Houston and are doing a lot more things to try to make that happen. As a matter of fact, one of the things that has spun out of DC squared is that we were the leaders on this anti-committee were having such a good time connecting with one another and sharing with one another about the things that were going on in our respective worlds, our respective ecosystems, but as well being aware of what we were each doing and saying, how can I help you? And some great connections were made. And we said, listen, I think we need to replicate this. So we're actually going to be launching something called Plan B. And we intend on launching, we were going to launch it actually next month, but decided we're going to push back just a little bit because we do want to do this live. And the Plan B is a double or triple entendre. It's around brunch. So we're going to have people get together around brunch, people who are leaders or at least showing leadership qualities in the ecosystem and are up and coming to, again, cause these connections to happen, to say, hey, let me hear what you're doing. I'm going to tell you what I'm doing. And let's see where there are opportunities, where there's intersection. And the other part of the double entendre of Plan B is that in entrepreneurship, you usually don't go in with a Plan B. You usually just, you just say, I'm just going for it. You're, arms, legs, and everything just flailing, going forward. And so this way of connecting people and making people aware of the cultural necessity to have that outreach component in order to create those connections. We're calling that the plan B. And so that I'm looking forward to launching, like I said, probably another 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay, awesome. We'll see. You guys get the insight if you tuned in. So we have a couple of questions from the audience. Sam, if you want to plug them into this screen, there's one from Michelle. What does Wogbe think about putting your life on the line and taking out loans to fund some of the startup costs for your new business?
That's a good question. I've answered this question a couple of times. So, and I do like how you phrase it too, putting your life on the line. So here's my general advice about funding a startup. When you fund a startup, you don't want to do so with debt at the beginning. In fact, you want to avoid that if at all possible. And the reason being is that usually when you're at the very, very early stage, you're at an idea stage, you're just trying to go from 0 to 1 or even 0 to 0.1. You really have no idea when and how this thing is going to manifest, or if it's even going to manifest. And once you go into debt, you have to have some idea of how you're going to service that debt. And so although you might have heard of very romantic stories of the person who just ran up all their credit cards and they, just went for broke and it happened to work out, like hitting it big in Vegas. Number one, that is so rare that it's not something that I would advise anybody try. Number two, if you pay attention, usually when somebody has done that, they've done it after already having some momentum, and it was to get over some last hill. Like, you know what? I have this thing going. We're manufacturing as fast as we can, but we need more money to pay the suppliers because they don't trust us. And so, but we've got a ton of orders. So we've got to somehow bridge that gap. That is an example of a rare case wherein I would say there's some justification or rationale for taking out debt. But if you're at the very beginning, no, just don't do it. And there are so many other things that you can do to move the ball forward. And probably what you want to do also to test really how viable it is see if you can raise some money from friends, family, and fools. And if they're willing to give you some money, that also demonstrates that this may actually be worth moving forward.
Awesome, Michelle. I hope that answered your question. And it's a little bit in concerto with the next question that we have from Shay. If you're someone who has zero knowledge about starting a company or wants to use this questionable time to build something of your own, where's the best place to start?
Great. The best place to start is Audible or Amazon. Get some books. Start reading, start listening. There are so many great books. If you could just do a search now on Google, starting a startup, and you'll see like 100 different books, and probably the first 50 of them are all classics by now. So there's so much information out there that the very first thing you need to do is do your homework. So here's top tip, everybody. One of the big things I find in people who are just getting started out and starting to poke around, and especially even when they're coming and talking to a mentor and something like this, one of the top things I find is that they are unprepared because of a lack of diligence. They haven't done their homework. And in this day and age, there's absolutely no excuse for it. There's so much information available to you. Just look online. You'll get tons of articles, blog posts on YouTube. There are people talking about it ad nauseum. And so you can get, I'm going to give a shout out for one. There's this Costa Rican company called Slidebean, and they actually do slide decks. But they also have two, I think, vlogs or YouTube channels that deal with the startup experience. And I actually really like the way that the guy does it. It's very, very well done, kind of very easy to understand, down to earth. He has another one called startup forensics or something like that. And it's all about companies that fail. And so I think that's another very interesting one. But that just popped into my head as another example of resources that you can find on the internet and say, let me go and do my homework and do my research. So a couple other things on that, top tips. Whatever it is you're doing, somebody else has probably already thought of it. So first, do some research, find out everything you can. You need to get a master's degree in whatever it is you're talking about. Go and look up everything you can on it. Look up who's doing that, who has done it well, who's not doing it well, maybe who is funding that sort of thing, who are the customers for that sort of thing, and start to put together the entire picture of this is what I'm thinking, why it's different or better than what I might have found out there before. And by the way, if you say nobody else is doing it, you haven't looked hard enough. So go ahead, keep looking, find who else is doing it, find what differentiates you and makes it 10 times better than what anybody else was doing, because you're going to need that if you're going to have a chance of surviving. And then find out, okay, who wants to buy that? Because at the end of the day, that's what business is about, right? You got to make something or produce something, find somebody who wants to buy it, sell it to them, and repeat. And so find out who wants to buy it, who would be that customer, create the story in your mind. So create the story, and I strongly suggest write it down. It used to be back in the day, Ileana, we used to write business plans. They were on these stone tablets, you chip at them and you write the thing out. Now they've got this fancy stuff where you don't even have to do that anymore.
Yeah. So we see a lot of these technical questions about where do I start, blah, 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 but we rarely talk about a little bit of the mental health of an entrepreneur, and it can get lonely. I know that. What is something that you would advise somebody that, because I know lots of founders are kind of like, you pitch the idea to their family and maybe they're Mexican like me and their kid, and their parents are like, if you're not a doctor or a lawyer, I'm not going to invest shit on you, So walk us a little bit on the mental health struggle of what a founder goes through, because it can get lonely. What is an advice you would give them?
Yeah, again, it's that gets back to what is an entrepreneur and realizing that this is a lifestyle and not just a vocation, and that it's not a lifestyle that everybody around you will have, not naturally, and that's what makes it special. So, and that's also what makes it these places like Capital Factory and places like these startup ecosystems that are popping up all over the state, they're all over the country, even all over the world, is that you find other people of like mind. And I think it's important to, it's called the proximity principle. So if you want to be successful at something, it's important to be in close proximity of other people who are doing that and doing it well. And so if I'd say for that mental health side, being involved and plugged into an ecosystem and really developing your network, not only for what you think may be the obvious benefits, like, I could develop my network in order to get funding, which is the first thing everybody's thinking, or I can develop my network maybe to find a team, but also just to find encouragement and support is very, very, very important. And so get plugged in to a local network or a local ecosystem. That can even start as small as getting plugged into an accelerator. So that's another one of the ways of getting that started, if you will. You get plugged into an accelerator or an incubator, and right away, especially if they're quality, you're within an ecosystem of people who are like-minded and who can tell you you're not crazy. So first, take it from Uncle Wogbe. You're not crazy. That's one of the first things I try to tell people. You're not crazy, or at least if you are crazy, it may not be such a bad thing. So get plugged into a network.
Awesome, Wogbe. I think you hit it right on the nail. So we got 3 more questions from the audience, and then we can wrap it up. If there's another question, you better write it up right now because we might not get to you. So next question is from Kyle. When you're starting in debt, parenthesis, there's a new product, what's a good way to get investors more involved in the business or finding co-founders out of it?
When you're starting in debt, what's a good way to get investors more involved? Okay, so I'm going to take out the debt part because I don't think that the debt part is really very much of a qualifier. It's a qualifier to you because when you're starting in debt, you really feel the fire. But we'll just talk about finding investors or finding co-founders. You have to, in order to find investors, the best way to find an investor, I say, is actually to do everything you can to not need one. So you have to put the emphasis on delivering a product that people are excited about, that they see the value in, that they want to buy, and that you
will buy.
Tell that, and they will buy, and you can tell that story. I have a very, very simple but kind of a run-on sentence of how I evaluate these kind of opportunities. And I ask, is this a big enough deal to enough people who are willing to pay for it profitably to make the investment risk worth it? And when I say investment risk, I'm talking about every kind of investment, including and especially time, which is just as precious as money, if not more so. So if you do that and you run your product and your processes through that mental construct, and you make it so that this thing is just so compelling, and you've gotten so good at telling the story of why this needs to be in the world and who it benefits and how it benefits them, then you'll start to find that interest is attracted in you. So the best way to find those investors, and I would probably put that too with the co-founders, because if you could tell the story well and get people excited, people will want to join you and they'll want to help see this thing come into the world.
There you go. Awesome. So next question is, how do I pitch to investors? Which is kind of tied with what you just said. Yep. It is a common question, and a lot of general advice is already available, but want to hear your perspective from your experience.
How do you pitch to investors? Okay, so there are lots, like you said, lots of general advice, but I'm going to give you one of my top tips. Top tip. There's no such thing as a general pitch. So when you pitch, you have to first qualify your audience. You got to know what you are pitching, who you are pitching to, what exactly are you pitching to them. Now, I'm going to stop on that for just a second, because a lot of people will just go and vomit out their entire, story and not, again, qualify that investor or whoever you're pitching to and say, what do I think is the thing I want to really hit right here? Where do I want to put the accent? And so, Ileana, you know this in Spanish, where you put the accent can change the meaning of the word. And so where you want to know, where do you want to put the accent? And therefore, that's going to make for a more effective pitch, more effective communication. And lastly, when you're pitching, you need to start in your mind at the end. Start at what you want the outcome to be. So don't just go and run into it and then hope at some point at the end, they're just going to say, how can I throw money at you? Start with what you want the outcome to be. Do you want the outcome to be that they're going to say, yeah, I get it, let's have a follow-up discussion? Do you want the outcome to be whatever it is? And so sometimes I just was doing a office hours with somebody, and he said, I was having trouble. I talked to the person, potential customer, and they said, well, okay. And that was it. And I said, okay, well, what did you ask him for? Well, I didn't really get to the ask. I said, well, then you got exactly what you asked for, nothing. So you need to make sure that you have something specific in mind as to why you're taking up their time and yours to get in front of them and pitch, and then make sure you get it. And that can also include, just an answer. Are you interested? Or are you not interested? No, I'm not interested. Great. Successful pitch. I now know they're not interested. Move on. Go and talk to somebody else.
Yeah. And I think it's very important also to internalize that. How you pitch is a direct representation of you as a founder. So if you're pitching without an action, we're learning a little bit about how you're running the company, right? So I think that was, a great answer. And that question, there's one more question. So finding a partner from one's network seems ideal, but sometimes it may not be possible. What would be your approach to finding a co-founder?
That's another very It's a good question. It's a very common question. So if you can't find a co-founder directly from your network, and I'm going to take a kind of a step back to make sure that this is set up well. First, before you go looking for a co-founder, I want to encourage you to do two things. One, I want to encourage you to be clear as to why you think you need a co-founder. And two, I want you to be clear as to what exactly is it that you expect a co-founder to bring to the table. So if you're only expecting a co-founder to perform a job, you don't need a co-founder. That's somebody who's going to be on your team as an employee. A co-founder should be somebody who's going to bring something of material value to the table beyond just the performance of a job or a set of tasks. And so be clear on that. What is it that I think that I want here from this person? And what gaps does that fill in terms of my skill sets and what I'm able to bring to the table? Then maybe use that to go back to your network and even others to say, I'm looking for this. Can you tell me where to find people like this? And then other things like I went on what is that that networking thing? It's where you do the lunch club. So I went on lunch club for a minute and was just meeting people. And as I was meeting people, I would tell them, hey, listen, just so you know, I'm now, by the way, if you go on lunch club and you do this, start with just being there to be there and meet people and absorb, because that's really the best way to do it. If you just jump in, I'm looking for a co-founder, they're probably going to squeeze them into a corner. But if you get to know people and you say, hey, and I happen to be looking for somebody with this or with that, that might lead you to where you want to go. And sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, you may find that, well, actually, I don't really need what I thought I needed. I actually can get a lot further on my own, or what I'm really looking for is, somebody to work with me or work for me. And that's going to be different.
Awesome, Wogbe. Well, we are up to our time. So I want to give you the chance to do some final remarks if you have any.
No, other than the chandelier is lovely. And we've had, I think
the running.
Yeah, the running. I always appreciate that. That's that whole camera technique of it's very, Guy Ritchie does that in his movies where he'll have the camera and you're moving along and it feels very intense. And so we didn't have any music during this session. It was earlier. So there was some cool, kind of, music earlier. But now that you've added that intense, running through the house thing, I think it's added to this. So no, I unless there's anything else you want me to say, but I've had some fun, Ileana. So thank you.
Me too, Wogbe. Such nice meeting you. Thank you for doing this. We really appreciate you being a mentor for Capital Factory, being a big advocate for founders to succeed. And so let's do more of these. Let's connect afterwards. I know that any founder can reach out to me. It's my name, Ileana Gonzalez at Capital Factory. Wogbe, I don't know how exclusive you are. If you want to give out your email as well, yes.
Yeah, so here's another thing about me. I don't give out my email nor my LinkedIn. So don't reach out to me on LinkedIn. And here's why I say that, and here's another top tip. At least this is the way Wogbe does it. I don't connect with people on LinkedIn unless I've met them. Otherwise, all those names are valueless. And so, in some way. So if you've seen me today, doesn't count as a meeting. But if we run into each other, even if we have a chance to talk for 5 minutes and you're telling me what you're doing and what have you, then cool. Now we've made a connection. Now I actually have a little bit of knowledge about you, and then we can connect on LinkedIn. But I think that's the way you should do it with everybody. Always seek to, how can I make this that small connection, and then we can connect on LinkedIn. So looking forward to running into people at different Capital Factory events, whether it be here in Houston or anywhere else in the state in our mega ecosystem.
Awesome. There you go, guys. Everybody's welcome to join Capital Factory. And so you can hit my boy, Bobby at capitalfactory.com. He is in charge of memberships. And so you can reach out to him if you are interested. And then obviously then Wogbe has office hours with us once in a while. But thank you so much for doing this. This was Intro to Startups and AMA with Wogbe Ofori. So nice meeting you. Now we know that he's going to connect with me on LinkedIn because he didn't accept me this last week, you guys. So he's preaching. He's doing what he's preaching. So thank you everybody for joining in today. Hope you catch us at the next one. I'm sure we'll post about it.
Gracias, Ileana. Mucho gusto.
Of course. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.